Hello there. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to the webinar for Change Program Initiation. My name is Wayne Knox. I'm a manager here at Able & Howe, and I'll be presenting the webinar alongside my colleague David Furby, who's a director here at Able & Howe. Before we get started, we'll just go through a little bit of housekeeping. And also, this is our second webinar. So we ran a webinar in July which covered delivering effective change management, and that's available online. You can see that on our website or on our YouTube channel. In terms of the format and how things will run today, you'll be able to see all the slides we'll be presenting on the screen. You can also ask some questions. You should see a Q&A box, so please feel free to send your questions through. You should also see a little status icon at the top. It's a little person with his hand in the air, or her hand in the air. If you can't hear us, or you're struggling to see or hear anything, please click on the status icon and just say there's an option for speak louder or speak softer, etc. So just let us know. Your microphones will be muted, so that's why we're asking you to use the icon there. Today we'll be running some polls throughout the webinar, just to ask your opinion on a few things. So if you have got the slides full screen, you might want to minimize that when we start to introduce the polls so you can see the box. We'll remind you of that when we get there. So I think it's we've had a few minutes already. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to David, who's going to kick things off.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thanks very much for joining us today. As Wayne said, this will also be recorded, so you can refer back to it later. And those of you who've signed up online and are registered will send you copies of the slides afterwards. Just starting with this quick outline, it's always good to know who you're listening to. Able & Howe is a management consultancy based in London. We provide organizational change management services to some of the biggest companies in the world. We essentially help organizations to support their people in adopting change. By doing that, we believe we maximize the benefits from programs and we can help minimize the costs. Hopefully you'll see some of that in action today, and we'll be able to convince you of the necessity of doing that if you're not already convinced. If you are a change management practitioner, hopefully you should find some new ideas, some new tools, and some new ways in which you can practice your art, if you will. So thanks very much. We'll move on to the next one. Just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. Our plan is to talk to you about change initiation. As Wayne said, we did a previous workshop around change more generally, and now we're dropping down into some of the more specific areas. Change program initiation is one of the areas we work quite often with our clients. It's an area that people often wish they'd done better, so we figured it was a good place to start. Today we'll cover some of the common pitfalls in the early stages of major change programs. We'll talk to you about some approaches in initiating business change programs, and we'll give you lots of practical tools and ideas. As Wayne has said, there are polls we'll put up as we go along. Try and get you clear within the next 40 minutes or so. So by quarter to the hour, we should be done. We might hang around for questions if people are interested as well. And just again to pace yourself, because I have this problem, we've got about 27 slides. More than half of them have pictures or models on them. So we're starting with some words early on, but you will have more on your screen coming up in the next little while. So do hang around, do stick with us. The other thing we tend to like to do is tell you up front what you're going to take away from it. So we just spotted a typo, apologies for that. Always good to get them out there early. What we tend to find, and I'm sure you have this experience as well, is when you are involved in a presentation or witness this kind of webinar, you tend to remember a couple of things at the close of it. So we thought we'd start by putting those out for you at the beginning, and we'll come back to them at the end. The main three things we want you to take away is the need to invest the right amount of time to initiate the change program. Generally speaking, programs will need a greater amount of time to initiate than most people think. However, you as a professional will know the right amount to invest. We can't tell you it's 3 months or 15 templates. So we can tell you that you need to ensure that that you've done the work that needs to be done before the program kicks off, and we'll talk to you more about that. The second point is around aligning everyone behind a common focus and purpose early. So that's part of what your change initiation is all about. If you haven't done that, you'll run into real troubles. We were talking to a technical consultancy the other day who implement ERP systems, and they were saying that because of a lack of change management, the program ran over in costs by £12 million quite quickly. And that overrun was useful for that consultancy because most of that money went to them, but it was less useful for the CEO, who had to explain the rationale for the hole in the budget and in fact lost his job. So they had lost a client while somehow managing to bank a few £1 million, but in the long term, having a successful client is even more important than having a profitable one. Finally, we talk about set and manage leaders' expectations from the outset. Fairly obvious one, but change initiation allows you to get ahead of this by involving them in the process. And just to say that the leaders we're talking about at this point are not just the CEO and the executive board of the sponsors, but even the leaders within the change program themselves, as well as the leaders in the organization who are anticipating the change. So you really need to get started early on that. We mentioned this in our last webinar as well, but there is a challenge in explaining what change management is. Those of you who work directly in the field will recognize that challenge. We see that challenge being answered quite easily with a question. And our question is, as a result of a project or program, will people need to do things differently? There's certainly many definitions of change out there. Change management can apply to individuals, it can apply to programs, to organizations, but in either case, it must involve people. So if the answer to that question is yes, then there's a change management need. Hopefully that'll make sense. Wayne's going to just put up a quick poll now to test the room, see that you're paying attention, and ask you to quickly choose one of these options on your screen. We'll close this in a moment and we'll report back.
So hopefully everybody should see the poll, and what we want to know from your perspective is how often is this question asked in your experience and on programs you've worked on? Last few seconds for anybody who hasn't answered. And maybe we'll just put the results up there for everybody to see.
Fantastic. So it gives you a sense. Perhaps one thing we can take away from this is that it's not always asked. Majority of the time, people will say it's sometimes asked. A number of people say it's rarely asked. I guess that helps explain the rationale for this particular webinar and for our interest and focus on change program initiation. So on that basis, let's just talk a little more clearly about, more specifically about change program initiation. We've put a full explanation on a single slide, so if you can't wait to get the slides and you want to take a screen grab, this is probably a good one to take a screen grab of. Essentially, change program initiation is about establishing an effective and robust change management strategy. In order to do that, we talk about a number of steps. Now, all of these obviously break down into a tremendous number of actions that sit below these as well. The first one talks about understanding your environment. So do you know what else is going on in the business? Are you aware of what the leadership priorities are, et cetera, et cetera? Second one is about building the case for change. Do you have the arguments prepared? Are you in a good position to explain why the change is required? Again, it's very easy to say, it's much, much harder to do, and it's quite labor intensive if you're going to be successful at it. Building the change strategy, again, seems deceptively simple, but governance, roles, understanding how the program is going to work is tremendously important at the beginning, and I'm sure most of you can tell good stories about how things go horribly wrong as you go along, if that's not clear from the outset. Business benefits, one of the risks there is in change management, particularly as delivered in some organizations, is that the benefits aren't clear, and without that clear benefits and the ability to track the benefits, the program's always going to be not as strong as it could be. Change plan, so having your plan together, and again, plan. Benefits are many, but by planning, you can get going faster and you can start to answer all of these issues that we've raised in benefits. Just quickly then, some moving pictures for you. Too often we see programs that take this shape. So the launch happens early and the go live is a long time later, and in between there's not an awful lot that goes on. People's attention is dragged away by other things, and there isn't much communication or engagement that happens. We start with we're announcing something big and exciting, and then everybody goes back to work, and then suddenly they hear, oh yes, by the way, it goes live tomorrow. It doesn't really need me to tell you that that's not ideal, and yet we continue to do it and change programs day after day. A preferred program model is this, where you can actually do enough preparation that your launch can be pushed back and your go live can be brought forward, and you can sustain the engagement and the organizational attention. And you do that by setting up your change program initiation appropriately and making sure that you're ready before you make any noises. And by doing that, you're able to get to the value more quickly and deliver that value effectively. We like to say, some of you will recognize this from having worked with us before, that the real value is delivered in execution. So it's not until go live that you can start to get some of that value that the organization is asking you to come in with. While we're on the subject of data, again, just quickly, or data, depending on your preferred accent. We're covering a lot of accents on this particular webinar, but you are often asked to understand what are the numbers that sit behind it. This is from a HBR, Harvard Business Review article that's a couple of years old, but as you guys will know, if it's in HBR, it must be true. Therefore, worth repeating, total value of the program is set out at 100%. Over the course of delivery, you have this gap that begins to appear that's about a third. And a number of those numbers in here can be traced directly back to poor program, change program initiation. Misapplied resources, poor communication, leadership issues, all that kind of stuff. All good to know. So, we will happily talk to you more about value leakage, as we call it. And if you do want to hear more about that, either wait for the webinar, which at this rate will be in 2016 at some point, or else give us a call and we'll talk to you about it. But the concept of there being a cost that sits behind not doing effective change management is a very compelling one, and one that I think you can usefully use with your client audiences. We do want to be able to make that case, and this slide helps you to start to make that. So again, we talked about common pitfalls. You will understand that there are some important things to do in change program initiation, as we've started to talk about. What we thought we might highlight with you is some of the things that you can begin to see and should be warning signals for you. So the first one of three we're talking about is, I love it, what is it? And in essence, this is when leaders decide that this is so important that they get very impatient and they want people to start talking about it ASAP. They've been working on it in the background for a long time. They're fully bought in and they want everybody to be as excited as they are, so they rush things out. We call this runaway leadership. Sorry, back one, Wayne, sorry. They're anticipating that everybody will catch up fast, and quite often people don't have the capability to catch up fast. They have too many unanswered questions, too much still to learn. They're just not in the same position. So launching too early can be a real problem. Change initiation will help you address this. And as we see on the next slide, there's some things that you can start to spot early, which will give you a sense of how that works. So big ideas. If conceptually they're so excited about it, but logistically the business case isn't there, it hasn't been prepared yet. It's not that it doesn't exist, that somebody couldn't explain it to you in a lift. It's that it's documented, well understood, and tested. Technical excellence, we often find people very excited about the technical delivery that people want to get to. So we need to implement this system by Tuesday or else something will happen. And then there's also the problem of people wanting to announce something but having no idea what happens on the next day. And a final one some of you will recognize, I'm sure, is a program that's very, very excited about the logo and the name of the program, much to the detriment of other important things that obviously they should be doing. Does this sound familiar so far? Great stuff. Okay. Second common pitfall is deliver, deliver, deliver. Anxious and enthusiastic people within the program try to get into action too fast. So they'll try and launch something without understanding the environment that it works, that it's operating in. They'll move straight into solution mode, and they'll push for things to happen at a speed at which they can't necessarily occur. So again, it's I'm ready, let's go. We recently spoke to a big financial services firm where they faced this particular challenge. They'd been involved in an M&A program, and people who had done the deal were desperate to announce it. And when they announced it in the organization, they talked about the deal, which is not really of any great interest to the people affected by it. And then they launched straight into the cost savings program and the other activities that sat behind it without particularly paying attention to the fact that nobody understood what was happening or why the ambition wasn't clear, and it was a little less obvious as to why all this was happening in the first place. So as a result of that, in that particular organization, engagement in the organization had dropped, and people had started struggling with the change, and as a result, financial figures were challenged as well. You probably recognize this in different shapes within your organization, but what are some of the early warning signals? Observable behaviors, silos, people working too much in isolation. That's where change management begins to become the conscience of the program. We ask the questions that other people don't systematically ask. And the program is unfocused, so specific, people focused on specific things with real urgency, perhaps sometimes the wrong agenda, so driven by outside factors such as the ERP supplier says they're going to charge us extra money if we don't go on Tuesday. The other one I just mentioned is the desire to communicate the deal, which again we see happening quite often. Third common pitfall, gravitational pull. You can find yourself in a situation where your program is so exciting that people want to attach their programs to it. And that will happen if the program itself lacks a certain level of clarity and focus, if it's unclear as to what it's going to be. And a couple good examples for that, we worked with a global financial service during the global financial crisis, who developed an internal strategy that they called fighting back. And it was about getting themselves out of the doldrums that they were in and really boosting their market and working well. Unfortunately, it was so unclear that at one point when we were in their main office, we were in a lift which came to a halt between floors, and somebody behind me whispered, "This must be part of the fighting back program." So when your program is being cited in that context, you know it's too broad. Similarly, we worked with a big international industrials business where they had a one business program. Most of you will recognize one business programs. They exist all over the place. This particular one business program, when the director of strategy presented it to the assembled organization, somebody said, well, what is it? And his answer was, this program is everything we do. Now, hopefully most of you on the line involved in programs will recognize that any program that is everything we do is challenging, and that strategy director, needless to say, didn't carry on with that program. So how do you spot some of these? Some observable behaviors. Happy coincidence when you meet somebody in the corridor or in the cafeteria and they say, you know, it's amazing that program you've got. It matches my program exactly, and I'll bring my budget or give you my resources, or better yet, you can run my whole program. Why don't we do that? Absentee governance, so not enough clarity about what's in, what's out. Too easy for people to say, well, you know what, this ties into that, therefore let's do them together. Strategic drift, I think of it as groupthink, but it's amazing to see how organizations and teams can convince themselves that what they're doing is actually truer to the original vision and leave the entire charter, the setup you've done of the program, the understanding behind while they move on to something because they feel that the goalposts have moved. If that is the case, go back to the beginning, start a new program. Strategic drift is a real problem for programs, and there are some we've worked on in the past that have well outstayed their welcome on the basis of trying to pick up new things that they would do along the way and being unclear in their focus. Change initiation will help you with that. So, Wayne, I think we're going to do another poll. Is that right?
Yeah, let's
just make sure everybody's still awake.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good for time at this end, which is quite a surprise. I know we could talk about this stuff for hours. So let's do a little check-in and ask another question. Here we go. You should see this opening up now. So which of these behaviours that we've talked about, and we've picked a few, do you commonly see? So this is multiple choice as well. You can select as many as you like.
Maybe when you...
Okay, some interesting results there. So I think let's just broadcast those so everybody can see them. So a couple of very common ones there. Work streams working in silos is something that we definitely see all the time, and I know is quite a frustration from a change perspective when we're trying to work across a cohesive program. Not understanding the people implications is obviously something that's close to our hearts, and something personally I have seen and heard quite a lot. And we always strive to make sure people are wearing a change and a people hat on large programs. David, anything else you think we should?
No, I think it's interesting to see though the amount of people who have seen these problems. I mean, 78%, 85% is pretty amazing, and so it's not uncommon in any way, these things, are they? And yet we seem to persist at them. And I think that's worth us just taking stock of, because clearly things could be done better.
Maybe also we do have a few minutes in our back pocket. We'll pause for any questions. Has anybody got any burning questions at this stage you might want to ask?
Okay, so that's a no then. But thanks for that. You can see hopefully the questions on the screen if you're not in full screen mode. So do please drop in some questions, as we'll take a bunch at the end if we can as well, and let us know some of the challenges you faced. If you just want to tell us a story, there's plenty of space to do that as well. So thanks for that. Wayne's now going to talk to us about one way in which you can help initiate a program.
Great. Okay, so we've talked to you guys a little bit about change program initiation, what that is, and some of the common pitfalls we've seen, and definitely we're all in agreement with some of the observable behaviours we've seen before. So maybe let's talk to you about some of the ways we feel that you can help programs initiate and kick off in the right way, so that the organisations you work for don't maybe make some of the same mistakes and come across some of the same challenges we've just been talking about. We see that there are a number of activities that you could focus on within your program and encourage a number of key members across the program. This isn't necessarily just something for the change guys to do. It's sometimes these are program things and program focus areas, but these are some of the things we suggest you can do to help the program. So establishing strategic goals and a change ambition, I think we've talked about, and how you can really get a focus on those. Identifying people impacts is definitely something that just came up in the poll, and we'll talk about a little bit about that. And then defining and positioning the program so that everybody's aligned, whether that's program people, stakeholders, are all aligned behind the same vision and the same purpose. One way in which you can, I guess, help elicit some of this information and help these activities take place is one of our tools. So we're going to talk you through a specific tool which we've used in the past, which is great. This is just one way and one approach. It's not the be all and end all, and it won't help answer all your questions and overcome all your challenges, but we think it's a great way of getting things started. So the change radar, as we call it, is an excellent way to drive or support initiation. We're going to go through some slides and focusing on some of these areas, so you might not necessarily be able to pick up everything in that screenshot. This is a good platform to help flush out information from, I guess, inside the heads of key program members or stakeholders. Sometimes people have the answers and people have the information, but it's locked away inside their heads. And one challenge we always find is how to pull it out, how to visualize that, and how to make sure everybody across the program is aware of it. We've seen many occasions where stakeholders have remarked this tool as being very engaging. So we find people like to use it, like to hear about it, and it's a good way of getting information across the program. what you can do is you can use this tool to capture high-level details and information about the program, and then share and socialize them across key leaders and across the business as well to bring the business in. And it also helps to visualize the change. One way to use this tool also is as an iterative process, so you keep it alive by revisiting it on a regular basis. As we know, planning up front doesn't mean that information doesn't change, so you always have to go back to some of the information that you collected earlier. So using this on an iterative basis is really important. And what this does, it helps keep some of this information front of mind, and it keeps, as I mentioned earlier, it lets people wear a change hat for once, whereby in their siloed work stream, as we saw in the poll, that they might not always do. So let's look at the first section. So here, this is focused on why the change is happening and why it exists. So there's three different areas we're going to cover here. Program members, in our experience, often don't know any of this. In their siloed work stream, they're focused on delivering the technical outputs of their work stream, and sometimes they don't necessarily know why they're doing it and what they're working towards, and there might be, they might not know the goals of the program. So in here we've got the vision, and this, I guess, is an opportunity to align everybody behind a clear vision and ensure everybody has a purpose. And in these boxes we've just put some examples. So for example, I've put create a multi-channel retail experience for customers. So that's one vision. And there's a number of ways you can use this tool. Let me just remark on that. I've run workshops in the past where we put up a blank template of this, and we get key leaders and program members in a room, and we ask the questions, and we run a collaborative session where we use post-it notes and we write up what the vision is, and we go through each section. So that's one way of doing it. The next piece then is the strategic driver. So it's important to be clear about what levers you can pull throughout a program, and also understand what guides leaders to make decisions and help you navigate your way through the lifetime of a program. Benefits then we've mentioned in the past, and this ensures everybody knows what the ultimate goal is, and for me these should be front and center on a wall somewhere so that everybody can see them and hear about them all the time. And it also helps you align your key change activity to those benefits, so we're not doing low value activities and we're not wasting time and resource as well. The next section then looks at key changes and change risks. So this really is about what's changing and what are some of those areas that could cause large issues for you from a change perspective. So the key changes helps us understand the gap between the current and the future state. In here we would plot some of the core delivery pieces from technical work streams. We'd want to understand what will be different for people and how and what will impact people specifically, and also what are the things that will create resistance. And this is just a high level view, so obviously change program initiation would happen quite early on, and when you first fill in this tool in, you might not have all the answers and you might not know everything, but it's a starting point. Then change risks, so falling out of understanding what the key changes are and what the move from the current state to the future state is, we should be able to highlight what some of those key risks that need our focus. So this is, we want to manage and mitigate these before they become large issues and start to cause the program and the organization a lot of problems. And some of these will need to be elevated at a program level for visibility. So they shouldn't necessarily be things that are managed just within the change work stream, for example. They should be on the program radar. The next piece then is all around understanding who we are managing the change for. You might use an existing program stakeholder matrix if there is one, or otherwise this is a great opportunity to get all the different work streams, the program manager, program leader in the room, and understand in their eyes who the change is for. So hopefully you can see some of the detail, but there's a kind of a straightforward table there, which means you can capture who the key groups are, the relative size of that group, maybe a key contact in that area. And then we look at the change across different areas, and that's what we call the operating model. So within there, you've got a bit of a sense check, because when we say change, that's quite broad, but what does that actually mean, and which areas of a business are we looking at? So we break that down by process, people, performance management, the organization, business information, people and culture, and then tech and systems. And so the example there, I've just put up a bit of a red, amber, green status to what level we think that group are impacted by that type of change area. And as I said, you might not have all that information at this point, but it's a stake in the ground that you can revisit and keep refreshed. And then the last column there is just to capture what some of those high-level impacts might be. So, for example, a whole host of new processes, maybe a reduction in FTE, maybe some new customer or internal systems that people have to get to grips with. So the last area then looks at, well, we know why we're doing the program, we know what's changing, we understand who the change is aimed at, but how are we going to help ensure that this change lands smoothly? You might within your organization have an existing change framework to work through, but on the example there, we've just put a very brief, crude example of involving, informing, and empowering, and we've aligned a number of pieces of change activity underneath that. This is a good opportunity to capture, based on the information you have today, what you think you might need to do to manage those change risks, what needs to happen to ensure there's minimal resistance as possible within impacted people. And then it helps you focus on some of the activities that you know need to take place to transition people from the desired state to the future state. So I know that was quite a quick rundown of the tool. What we can do is we can send you a copy of the tool with the slides after this presentation. And just to recap, in the past we've used this in large workshops with gathering in a key program people in the room to elicit this information. We've also used it where we've sat down with specific individuals and kind of talked them through it more one-to-one to get some of that information. Sorry, David, go on.
That's all right. I was just going to say we're coming towards the end of the scheduled part of the program. We are going to do some questions, and we're going to wrap up and put a couple of other ideas in front of you before we close. But I just wanted to pause and maybe ask a question which isn't in the... Do we have a poll now? Am I jumping in?
No, but we can create one.
No, I was just going to ask whether people have in their organizations a change team that can do or that does this kind of work. So are you either part of a change team, or are you in an organization where there are people specifically skilled in this kind of work who are able to do it? And you can just answer as part of your question. So a yes to both, which is great. Yeah, yes, there are change teams. Do they do this kind of work, David? Is this familiar? Have you seen similar things to this happen in your organization? Yeah, good stuff. Great, that's good to know. A lot of organizations, I think, struggle with this. There's a certain level of understanding, but a transformation team, but many changes happen outside of the change teams. Yeah, so really good point raised by Johnny. There are a lot of organizations have teams that do this kind of work, but often those teams don't get to do the work. So that same question was raised, or same point was raised by David as well. So there are teams that do it, but often changes then run elsewhere because they don't want to go through the orthodoxy of working with the teams, or the teams make themselves hard to work with. We've seen that in a number of organizations. So it is a bit of a challenge. And I think it goes to the point we were making earlier about the complexity with which change is viewed. It's not seen as being consistent, to the point Simon's just made about it waxing and waning, whereas honestly in most organizations there is a fair amount of consistency in the way in which change happens. Change programs tend to run for an awful lot of years. And second of all, the skills that are required to deliver change should be consistent. a view of what change management is should be consistent. We tend to see change management as an add-on to program management. So we'll often run into some of the bigger consultancies, some of whom I hope are on the line, who will add it on to program management and say, we'll do change as well. And it's really unclear in a lot of those cases. It dates me, but going back into the 1990s when I was working on a major change in Philadelphia, and the big consultancy there said, I spoke with the change person from that particular consultancy, and he said, I've been put on this because I did the marketing elective in my MBA. So I'm being a bit unkind, I suppose, but it is important to recognize that there are specific skills and specific tools and now really clear processes and understandings that are available out there in the market for people to do these kind of things. So as Alison says, people tend to focus on progress and tracking rather than strategic approach. Spot on, Alison. I think what we find is it's tremendously important to do that kind of work, the tracking and understanding benefits realization, etc. However, sometimes there aren't enough people creating work to do the tracking, and the strategic angle is tremendously important, just as you say. So I have another question for you in a minute, but why don't we sort of think about bringing it into land a little bit and move on to some of the other points that we were going to just cover off as we conclude. I guess a key thing we just wanted to summarize again. So it may be useful for you in thinking about how you go about your change to recognize that there are certain steps in the process. We talk about them in our business as service lines, but in fact they're almost the 360 degrees of change. So there is this whole idea of change initiation. And as I mentioned up top, we're often called in partway through a program to say, we've come a bit unstuck. What's the problem? And the problem very clearly becomes a lack of initiation, a lack of having set up the key tools and processes by which the program needs to run. So we end up retrofitting a little bit, fixing the car on the road, as you'd recognize the expression. There's masses and masses of change delivery. There are lots of organizations, people like some of you on the call who are doing that now, where change delivery is a key feature. I think it's important, and some of you may find this surprising coming from me, but it's important to distinguish this from change communication. And change communication is a growing discipline, and an awful lot of people talk about doing it. And change communication is internal communication within a program. And I think we're not talking about that in this case. It's very valid work to do. But change delivery and change support will often involve change management specialists working within a work stream within a program, or aligning themselves to communication or to other factors, HR, that are going on. But it will be doing that engagement, the tracking, the building, the business case, the benefits, a lot more balls in the air than simply communicating the program. And that's fairly important. And the final point here is around change capability. Maybe it's not a massively commercial approach, but Abel and Howe's view is that we want to build change capability in organizations we work with. And I would imagine as a professional working in an organization or as a consultant, those of you on this webinar will recognize that being able to build skills in organizations is tremendously helpful.
Yeah, I think if we do ourselves out of a job, then we've done a good job.
Yeah, and let's not do that in a rush, shall we? But building that change capability is quite tricky, and it tends to start often with the leadership, but we're not necessarily desperate to get into the boardroom. It can start with the program team. It's creating a better understanding of who's where in the organization and what they know in terms of change, and getting them prepared and able to go off and do the change that's required in the organization. And that's tremendously important. Some of you I recognize from organizations that do change quite well, and you will see how good change works in businesses. And if all businesses work that way, the world would be a much happier place. So sorry, I'm multitasking. If we move on to the next one. So final three takeaways. As we promised to you, we put these up early on. Come back to them now, and hopefully they'll make even more sense. You need to invest the right amount of time to initiate your program fully. You want to do that up front. You want to do it early. You want to invest the time. You don't want to rush it because it'll cost you in the long run, and that will cost you value in the business. It'll cost you real money that you're going to have to spend to back up and fix the things that weren't clear. Align everyone behind a common focus and purpose early. Again, we've spoken about this quite a bit. But if everybody understands what the change program is designed to do. If the program office can all cite the goals clearly, if the benefits are understood and you're ready to track them, then you're ready to go, but probably not before. And finally, set and manage leader expectations from the outset. And that's important to be able to do, as I said, not just with the senior leaders in the business, but right across the program and right across the business. So within the program, do the program leaders understand what's going to happen and how that's going to work? And then at a local level, do people in the organization who are seeing the change coming, do they understand what needs to be done? So Wayne, I don't know, a question's come in from Patrick. Is that something you want to answer?
Yeah, I wonder if we
chance to read it.
No. So Patrick, thanks for your question. Why do we think it is so common that people change element isn't often a priority in change programs? Are there any good research examples that can show the cost to the business of getting this wrong?
Yeah, so Patrick, great question, and really useful one. We did allude earlier to a value leakage, which is a process and a bit of terminology that we've developed to try and explain exactly that. The cost of program overruns can be found in some programs, but you can imagine why organizations aren't in a great rush to publish that information. One of the challenges we've found, and be really interested in your feedback in this webinar as well, is that many organizations don't track the benefits realization from change programs. So you'll see them launched in an annual report, but you won't then have a report 2 or 3 years later as to just how much of that promised value has been captured and which of it has gotten away. The HBR article we cited earlier, Patrick, which you can find online by typing in the subject topic, it talks about how consistently up to a third of the value is lost and puts a specific percentage against each factor that drives that. We would argue a lot of that is down to poorly initiated programs, but value leakage is something that happens in almost every change program. We were surprised recently to talk to a CEO of a major FTSE 100 company, actually probably FTSE 25, and say, how do you know whether the value is tracked of that change program that's announced? And I'm afraid the fellow responded by saying, not only do I not know, it's not really my job, so I don't care, which is quite distressing, but probably an indication of the way in which some of this is viewed. So really good question. There is research out there or case studies. We've talked about a couple over the course of this, and then there are some of those HBR articles that cover it as well. So do keep the questions coming. We want to thank you for participating. We want to answer your questions. We're going to put up a poll at the same time now that asks you for some suggestions around topics that you'd like to see addressed. Let me get the language just correct. What further change topics would you like to hear about from Able in-house? So we're setting up this webinar process. We seem to have gone so far without a hitch. So we'll do it even more frequently. But what other topics would you like to see addressed? So if you don't mind typing in some notes there and some suggestions as you go, we can still see the Q&A board that some of you have been typing on. So to David, Sean, Johnny, Allison, etc., thank you very, very much for your comments. Do stick around and keep typing. We'll keep answering.
Yeah, and maybe while we get some feedback from yourselves there, we'll just also call out, you can reach out to us on our website, which is www.ableandhow.com, or our mailbox info@ableandhow.com. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, every social media channel under the sun. So please reach out to us.
So some great topics coming in, really amazing stuff. Thank you very much. And to those of you signing off, goodbye. One of you has just said that, but do stick around. We'll read some of these out and we'll take some questions for the next 10 or 15 minutes if you are willing and able to stick around, because this can be the most valuable part of the conversation. But we have come to the end of the formal presentation. So if you do want to rush and get that cup of coffee or join that meeting, please do. So Wayne, do you want to just pick some of these out and we can have a chat about them? I mean, we'll take these all on board in terms of thanks, Kat, by the way. See you later.
Yes, I think this one's a good one.
Yeah.
I was just disappeared. How to make an impact when joining a program midstream, which I know you called out. We've done quite often.
Yeah. And so there are two things to do around this. We talked about change initiation sometimes happening mid-program. And it is important when you get in there to look at some of these challenges and say to yourself, how do these challenges work? So could we put a slide back up there or anything, or will we lose stuff? And so at those when you join a program partway through, and you can look at it and go, I see some of the things going wrong here. We're lacking this. We don't have a clear vision. We don't have a clear business case, etc. You definitely want to try and backtrack and get to those as much as possible. However, we're quite conscious of the fact that programs have a mind of their own, and they do exist in within an environment in which people talk and behave in a certain way. And if you show up and say, "Look, guys, you got this all wrong. We're going to have to go back to the beginning," you may find yourself the least favored person in that particular change program. So it's about choosing your battles. And if you had to prioritize, you can look down the list back on the overview slide of some of the things to do. Having a clear case for change is always going to be tremendously important. After that, potentially roles, clear governance, some of those things. So bringing those into the equation will be tremendously important. Lovely feedback from folks as well. So thanks for those of you writing comments to say thank you. We love that. Being the people we are, we're always happy to hear good things. And a bunch of you sticking around. So we will keep talking for a little while. Really great that you're on the line. So what else have we got here, Wayne? Tying strategic approach and change with activities. Chatham House, the good, the bad, and the ugly lessons from these case studies. So I think the request that's come in there is, can you tell us all the stuff that you're not allowed to say publicly? Because that would be really helpful. Of course, we're in Chatham House, etc. Really nice in theory. I'm afraid, unfortunately, we're recording this and we'll be broadcasting it afterwards. We have a lot of war stories. We're not prone, as I hope most of you aren't, to telling too many tales out of school, but there are quite a lot of case studies that you can look at, which will provide you with really interesting insights and ideas about where others have struggled. Because one of our biggest challenges, we think, in change is that the community of change managers, the understanding of what change management is, organizational change management, is not yet clear enough. It's not obvious to us where change management people go to drink. And therefore, we're not learning enough from our case studies. Too many people running change programs are having to relearn their old errors all over again. So I think that's a tremendously important one. There's lots you can learn from those case studies, though. And to the person who sent that in, I would suggest even look at things that might not appear to you to be a change program, and see what you can learn from that. Because quite often programs where you have runaway leadership, that's a change issue, but it often happens in programs that people don't think have a change aspect to them. I'd like to hear more about sustaining change. Thank you for the session. Someone signing off. Whole session about sustaining change, and I think that's a good one we can come back to. Again, we find that change programs tend to fold up their tent and disappear quite quickly, a little too fast, often because the person running the program is successful and therefore gets promoted into another job. And so they're not there to see it through. So really interesting stuff there. What else have we got, Wayne? Maybe one or two more and then we'll let you go, because as you can tell, we enjoy their conversation, but we should probably cut it off. Influencing small changes that are not managed to change in change teams, little things that people may not even realize are changes. Yeah, really good. And Wayne, maybe you can take a crack at that. Let me just set it up. I think in order to become a program, things need to be quite significant. And I think that's where we come back to some of our issues around change capability. So an organization that understands and recognizes change and the fundamentals of change management can better regulate its own changes, whether they be big or small. And again, to be completely frank, we found most organizations don't have a tremendous amount of change capability. They don't have a background in change. Leaders don't recognize it quite often, not necessarily their fault, depending on where they've been educated or how old they are. Change management is a relatively emergent discipline. And so it's not surprising that these things would come up. So again, I think maybe we sign off at this point. Wayne, I don't know if you have any other final thoughts, but thank you very much from me anyway for participating, for being involved in this. Hopefully you'll stick with it. Let your colleagues and friends know that this will be available online fairly soon. Do give us a call if you want to have a chat, and be happy to talk to you can already see we've got lots of suggestions for the next few topics.
Keep us
Love
busy.
suggestions on how to make this format a little more interactive, perhaps, or things you'd like to see differently. But it's been a great pleasure spending some time with you. Thanks very much.
Yep, so thank you for everybody that's still online. Thanks for joining and engaging and sharing some of your experiences with you. And we hope to see you on the next webinar sometime in the new year. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye now.